Hello and welcome to this bonus Bagseed. This was the 420 episode of the Cannabis Corner, episode 31. My co-host on this is Lucas Barfield, and he is a radio personality at 101.9 Radio Tacoma. And enjoy the show.
My name is Lucas Barfield. I'm a local cannabis activist, reporter, and educator here in Tacoma, and I am joined by my co-host, cannabis activist and veteran, and cannabis podcaster down in Oregon. I am joined by Uncle Dig. How are you doing today, Uncle Dig?
Hey, Lucas, I'm doing great. It's a nice, chill, overcast day, and we're recording on 420. Happy 420.
Yeah, happy 420, and it is sort of accidental that we decided to record today, and it was not on purpose. It's like, hey, let's record on Tuesday, and then suddenly I realized, oh wow, that's 420. So it is kind of a great day to be recording a show on cannabis. And there's a lot of history behind 420. The rumor is that it started with some kids meeting up at 420 and doing some kind of search for some other cannabis or something. But
the Waldos and their infamous search of their Navy brethren's outlaw patch.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it could even just be urban legend. So I'm thinking it might be true, but I think it could be a whole bunch of other things. So who knows? I do like that story, though. So let's go with that Navy outlaw patch, and that's where 420 comes from. But anyway, it is the date that everybody has decided that they're going to celebrate the world's greatest plant, the cannabis plant. And what are you doing today, Dig, to celebrate 420?
Well, I'm going to be smoking a lot of weed.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing, too. I'm judging a cannabis cup, and I got a little behind last week because I got a little sick, but I'm having to catch up today. So I'm doing a lot of samples and a lot of judging of some really great cannabis around the state of Washington. It's the Washington State Sun Cup. So I'll be having some more information on that, but lots of great cannabis out there. So if you're out there and you're hearing this not on 420, pretend whatever day it is 420 and go ahead and light up after the show. So we are going to jump right into our news for this week. But first, we want to talk about Washington State and just kind of a recap of where we were before. We were talking about there were some medical bills in Washington, and we were hoping they were going to get through. Well, folks, sadly to report, all the bills in Washington, except for one social equity bill, which has some issues as well, but it did pass. All the cannabis bills in Washington State, including the tax break, including the arrest protection for patients, they all failed, Dick.
Yep, even the home grow, right? It's not a proud day for a proud month, I guess, for Washington State drug reform and cannabis social equity reform and home grow reform, and just a bad day in Washington. One of the early pioneers in cannabis slowly following behind to basically a third world backwater in the world of cannabis.
Well, it is, and I think people think we over-exaggerate that, but we're not. I report on a lot of cannabis policies, and Washington State is definitely falling behind. And just on that news, speaking of falling behind, let's jump right into our news. And our first news story is an article that I actually put out today on Ganjapreneurs. Go over and check it out. It's called Washington State is Grappling with Drug Possession Laws. And I think everybody knows that the Blake decision, the Washington State Supreme Court threw out Washington drug felony offenses. So no longer is it a felony to possess small amounts of drugs in Washington State, and it threw the whole state into a whole big panic, basically, because it also let a whole bunch of people out of jail, similar to what they had down there in Oregon, Dig.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that like, and in this case in particular, in Oregon's case, they didn't make it all retroactive. Washington was a little different because y'all's laws were thrown out, so they had to release those prisoners. In Oregon, the law was amended. So they didn't actually have a large mass prisoner release just because of a result of the court decision. Now, I understand that part of your prisoner releases were automatic by local authorities, and some of them had a very simple request process through the governor's office, right?
Yes, the governor commuted 15 sentences, and the only reason he did 15 is because they said when they first started looking at it, there were 70, and by the time they got around to doing it, there'd been so many people released that there were only like 24 left. With a lot of those people are having like commingling charges. You know, they're not going to let you out if you got a drug charge and a gun charge, and so there were still some issues in there. But now, so where we stood 2 weeks ago is there were no drug arrests in Washington State. So here comes the Senate. They passed just last week a bill called SB 5476, and this reinstates criminal penalties, misdemeanors, and up to a Class B felony. That actually passed the Senate. It got so bad that the sponsor of the bill had to withdraw her support, and so she voted no, but it did sail onto the House. And just to let everybody know where it stands right now, it's in the House. They're going to have an executive vote tomorrow. But SB 5476, you guys, is really big problem. They say they want to fix drug laws in Washington State, but basically what they're doing, and Dig confirmed this with me by reading the article too, is they want to pick up the racist drug war conducted by the police, and then to jail, and they want to pick that up, and then they want to set it right back down to a racist drug war, but instead of a war, it's just kind of like a not quite as bad as a war. So instead of police taking you to a jail, they're going to take you to a nonprofit, and if you don't go along with what the nonprofit says, you get a misdemeanor, and that can go to a civil infraction. It's a whole big mess, Uncle Dig, and so
they're privatizing the drug war is what they're doing. They're going to have these nonprofits. I'm sure they're not going to have anything that resembles holding areas for patients or anything like that. And they're basing the entire thing based on the truly flawed and racist law enforcement data that already exists, which honestly should be thrown out with the bathwater because it's garbage data, garbage in, garbage out.
And so that is just a basic overview, guys. And so if you want to check it out yourself, check it out. It's SB 5476. And there's a lot more to it, and you can go over and read my article over at Ganjapreneurs on this. It is a very big, complicated mess, but I'm telling you, as your local drug and cannabis activist, it is a big problem. Honestly, Dig, this thing makes SB 5052, which criminalized medical cannabis, it makes it look like just a date out on the playground because it is way worse. So everybody keep an eye out on that. And I just wanted to get that out there. But we're going to move on to a little bit happier news for the rest of the show. And, of course, that's not going to be in Washington State, funny enough and sadly enough. But we're going to move over to, let's talk about some legalization. So there was a couple states that legalized, Dig. Tell us about those.
Yeah. So and I'm looking primarily at home grow. New York legalized, but their home grow regulations has gone back and forth in the past couple of weeks, and I don't know where they landed on that. Hopefully we'll have an update on what New York's home grow laws look like down the road. Now, New Mexico is going to allow an individual to have 6 plants at home or up to 12 per household. So that's a pretty generous law. And actually, that's pretty similar to what you're allowed under medical law here in Oregon. So good job, New Mexico. Now, Virginia is allowing you to have 4 cannabis plants without legal repercussions beginning July 1st, 2021. That's this year. So they're going to make your outdoor cultivation season artificially short, but you can grow starting July 1st. Now, good luck purchasing those genetics. And that's it for for legalization updates. So 2 states are going home grow is legal, and New York, I think, will allow some form of home grow, but I doubt in those amounts. The last I heard was 3 immature plants and 3 mature plants. Well, I'll keep you posted.
All right, please do. And I spent a little time in New Mexico. I actually worked for the Boy Scouts of America in New Mexico for 2 years. It was really interesting because although it was illegal then, and that was back in the 1990s, it was well known that you could go to Taos, New Mexico, and get all the cannabis you wanted. And then the second year I worked there, actually my boss, who worked for the Boy Scouts of America, had a pound behind his seat and would divvy it out to all of us employees. So, New Mexico is right near the border there in Mexico. It is slam packed with cannabis this whole time. It's amazing that we're still doing this in 2021, but it's really good news that they're opening this up. There also is some provisions in there to expunge some cannabis arrests in there too. So good news and good from New Mexico and Virginia. And we hope New York gets it together and gets their home grow right.
Man, your scout troop sounded way more fun than mine. In Texas, they were all snorting Adderall and smoking cigarettes.
Man, those Boy Scouts. But so we're going to move on to our next story, which is out of Massachusetts. And this is an interesting story and something that is the first of its kind in the country. And actually, the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission is going to start their own website, kind of similar to Leafly or Weed Maps, where they talk about all the different cannabis products on sale in in Massachusetts. Now, they wouldn't do it in Washington State because our traceability system, which, by the way, we're going to have somebody on later to talk about Washington State's traceability system, Jim McCrae. We don't keep track of anything. So what I'm telling you is it's really nice to see Massachusetts, the state, actually engaging and writing down all the products they have out there in the public view. I think it's a really good thing.
Well, and this is I wouldn't say this is as in-depth as Leafly or Weed Maps, and it's really not as experienced consumer focused, but I do like to see a state getting involved with the informatics around cannabis and trying to create a gold standard, at least, so that their consumers can go on to a state website and say, this is an extract, and this is what an extract is, according to the state of Massachusetts. And I think that if they do a good job with this online guide, it could really be a game changer in the world of cannabis regulation and really cannabis and drug education in a more progressive and intelligent manner in the future. So good job, Massachusetts.
All right. So next article we're going to move on to is out of Harvard. And this is a study that shows that medical cannabis helps with pain management. And this is one of those things where there's a lot of evidence for people saying, hey, this helps with my pain. But one of the arguments we always get when we're trying to do medical cannabis legalization is, well, there's not enough research. Well, here is a study right out of Harvard saying, hey, this can help with pain management. So do you have some of those details on that study?
Yeah. And basically they just did a very small controlled study, and they tested a couple people for chronic pain and stuff. And they also had some secondary results that I found more interesting, because we've all known for a long time through studies out of Germany, Israel, and some other slightly more progressive countries on cannabis, with good scientific communities, with trustworthy universities, Western standards of medicine, the whole nine, who have produced studies that are very similar. But what made me happy about this Harvard article is that my friends were sending it to me very excitedly. And what that told me is that this is reaching more people than those other articles did before. What's also interesting specifically in this article is that the study found that higher THC consumption was connected with pain relief, while CBD intake was related to mood improvement. And I understand that when we discussed this finding, you had some stuff that you wanted to say about it, Lucas.
Yeah, just that finding about the THC and CBD, it kind of lines up with what we know about those two compounds, which is that THC interacts more with the endocannabinoid system. So that is an actual system in your body that helps bring the different systems in your body to homeostasis. So THC works with those CB1 and CB2 receptors way more than CBD does. CBD does still interact with those things, but it really interacts more with things like serotonin. So when you talk about mood, serotonin is definitely something that will help control your mood, either good or bad. That's well known. So it was kind of interesting to see that, because that does line up with what I know about those two compounds. And it also, I think, will help with a lot of people out there making false claims about CBD, that these kind of studies will help us kind of peel back the curtain so that we can actually see what is working and what is not. Now, another thing I found interesting is they said that 13% of the people reduced their opiate use. Now, they said that wasn't a very big deal, but 13 people out of 100 taking less opiates, those 13 people are going to have a way better quality of life. So it is an improvement.
Oh, I think that when, especially in regards to quitting certain drugs, specifically opiates, I think that cannabis is going to be a panacea in recovery efforts, especially medically assisted recovery in the future once we have more studies like this. It would be my high suspicion that that's the case, because we've known that people have utilized cannabis to come down on opiates traditionally and other harder drugs for a long time, long before there were medical studies backing up their practice.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the disappointments I have in this whole current drug legalization movement is the word cannabis is just left out. We are still relying on these fake opiates like methadone and Suboxone, which are simply opiates kind of repackaged in a pharmaceutical package. Instead of being made on the mountains of Afghanistan, they're made in some pharmaceutical lab somewhere on the East Coast. So, but cannabis can be something to replace some of these pharmaceutical drugs. So I've been a little disappointed that the cannabis movement hasn't engaged, but I do understand why, because cannabis still is seen as one of those street drugs. So I think the cannabis movement is a little wary of getting involved in this movement.
Well, it's understandable, right?
Yeah,
for the longest time, people, because of that, that real bomb that cannabis can provide when you're coming down from harder, like from opiates or something that, has a harder come down, cannabis can help with that. And we weren't the hard drug users aren't the only people to notice that. So there was a little bit of association there that happened. And we don't, as a community, want to encourage that because of this new approved status we're starting to gain. But that we can't forget that cannabis is also a very powerful medicine, and it can help people in recovery in a way that other methods just simply can't.
Right. And I want to make sure as a cannabis activist that we don't leave behind some of those people on the more, as you call them, the more powerful or harder drugs, just because our movement is more forward, and because there is still a lot of taboo on using some of those harder drugs, just like there used to be a taboo using cannabis, but cannabis has kind of moved out a little ahead of them on those harder drugs. So I think the cannabis movement, me personally, I want to try to make sure that I'm still reaching back and trying to pull those drugs up into more acceptable status. And I'm not saying more acceptable like I want everybody out there using them, just acceptable that we're not throwing people in prison for them, or dehumanizing people for using crack cocaine, or dehumanizing people with using meth, because methamphetamine is a big dehumanizer. No one ever talks well about people on methamphetamine. So
no.
Yeah, it's a thing in our culture, and just as cannabis folks, we gotta, because they'll take you to jail for cannabis just as quick as they'll take you for heroin in some places. So we all got to kind of stand in solidarity with all of our substances. That's just kind of how I feel about that, Dig.
I agree with you to a certain extent, and I think that, like you said, I'm not advocating people use or manufacture or traffic these substances. We're just merely advocating that people who do use these substances aren't met with violent state repression simply for their choices, which we may or may not approve of.
Absolutely. So next up, we're going to get into our interview, and that is with a local cannabis activist and statistician Dr. Jim McCrae. All right, Lucas Barfield here, and welcome back to the Cannabis Corner. Today on our interview, we are joined by Dr. Jim McCrae. Dig and I are here, and we are going to be talking about medical cannabis here in Washington State. We're going to be talking about some traceability, and we're going to be talking about a recent blog post Jim put up called Fidelis Cannabis. And let's go ahead and get started. How you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good today, and a nice sunny day like we were just talking about here in Washington. And what I wanted to talk about today is really interesting that you are here on this day in particular, Jim, because just so happens today is the anniversary of the signing of SB 5052. And that is the bill that took medical cannabis in Washington State and basically took it all apart, and now they have it into a different system that we call it the 502 system. And that happened 6 years ago today. And I just want to kind of touch base with you, Jim. What was your involvement with medical cannabis back then, and what brings us to what are you doing in cannabis that basically your qualifications to talk to us about some of our issues we're going to be talking about today?
My involvement back then, first of all, was that I was, at the time, a medical cannabis patient, card carrying one. I won't go into why that is the case. I have not continued that status through the regulated years. But my background is I am way back when a substance abuse researcher. I did my doctoral work in experimental psychology, looking at rats self-administering morphine intravenously and the differences in tolerance and physical dependence based on how much control they had over their drug use. I did postdoctoral work at the University of Pennsylvania with human substance abusers, and then went off to a multi-decade career in the pharmaceutical industry, doing primarily quantitative work in support of their commercial efforts. So when we legalized here 7 years ago or so, I was very interested in what was happening. It was a big social change. I thought it was a very positive one. And I was amazed at the transparency that Washington law afforded with respect to data availability. So basically, data were available from one end of this market to the other. And I'm a real data hound. I'm a real quant guy. And I was all over that data from early on in the game. So that's what I've been doing for much of the last 5-6 years, is looking at the data that is spit out by this market in this state. I'm increasingly looking at other states as well in the whole consumer protection space. But I've really gotten to know the market very well. And one of the things that I found kind of disturbing early in the launch of the medical part of this, when almost 6 years ago, the governor signed into law the Patient Protection Act, SSB 5052, was that they were going to possibly leave behind some of the patients, and more importantly, some of the providers, some of the legacy providers that had served their needs in the past. So it was going to obviously be a difficult transition for some to go from what was basically an underground activity for many years into the bright lights of a regulated thing where, people are literally looking at what you do on cameras 24/7 if you're in the garden. So I was worried about it, and I've sort of tracked it, and what I've seen tracking what little data are available on the medical side of the market just horrifies me. So that's the background.
Now, this is Uncle Dig here. What metrics do you find most concerning on the medical side?
Probably the single one is the number of patients that are in the registry. You can still go to a provider and get a card, but that doesn't afford you all of the benefits of the regulated medical system. You actually have to go into the patient registry, and thereby you are allowed to, have more product on your person, and you don't get charged sales tax and blah, 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 blah.
Of course.
Before the market started, they estimated Washington has an adult population of over 5 million people. They estimated that about 250 to 300,000 folks were actively engaged in the medical cannabis, the old Green Cross market we had here. that had, by most estimates, somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 Green Cross access points scattered around the state. The Department of Health and everybody, estimated 250 to 300,000. There are, as of January, my estimates looking at the Department of Health data are that there are about 6,200 patients active in the state today. It's just a small number in absolute terms. It's a small number, a tiny number, based on any expectations that I'm aware of.
That sounds a lot like what happened here in Oregon. As soon as the legal recreational market, as they called it, came into being, for instance, our medical dispensaries that were specifically medical went from like 16 to 3 in the county. Medical growers started dropping like flies, and patients that needed high volume from a grower to get certain like RSO or whatever their medical needs were met, they started having problems finding medical growers who would take on the plant counts with the new metric requirements. It was a nightmare. It was bad for everyone.
Oh, yeah, I agree. It was bad for the state ultimately as well, but it was bad, certainly bad for the consumers. It was bad for the people that were trying to help them. Horrible. But anyway, the system, that single statistic, the 6,200 patients, I think really tells the story. It's down 75% from where it was 1 year into the market in June of 2017, a year after they launched regulated medical here. And by that time, they'd closed up or were pretty aggressively closing up any remaining medical stores that were not in the regulated system. It was 4 times that amount 1 year into the system. So now 5 years later, it's down 3/4 from that. And all the other statistics as well. Less than 2% of the sales in the market are of DOH medical quality product, general use certified, as they call it. Less than 1.5% of the sales in the entire regulated market are done without sales tax. And that means they're going to a patient who has a valid card in the registry and is buying their product at a store that is active and in the registry and all that good stuff. And all of that stuff is tracked, by the way. That's not something that's commonly known. And when it's tracked, it is shared with law enforcement. And it's, and that is just a fact. So
and I want to we should bring this up to anyone who's thinking about registering with either medical program in Oregon and in Washington. It is a little bit different in how your purchases are tracked from state to state. But if you're part of most state medical programs, your purchases are tracked to some degree. It just depends to what degree on which state.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and that is why they put that 37% excise tax on there to begin with, is because they were afraid that the medical patients were going to be going into the 502 market, taking that money, taking that cannabis that was untaxed and reselling it. So they wanted to make it all equal. And I've been doing a lot of reporting on this, and it is interesting because states like Florida have over 500,000 patients registered. And then you look at a state like Michigan, I know they have up over 100,000. And so these other states have thousands and thousands of people registered. California a lot, they kind of do it differently. But why do you think patients in Washington State, because it is a problem. I just ran into some people I know the other day got registered, but this is the first person I have met in years, besides myself, that was ever registered. Why do you think patients are not getting on the registry?
Fundamentally, they don't see the benefit of being on the registry for the most part. There's a core group, and I want to emphasize, I've been tracking the dynamics of the patient registry membership since its inception. And there's one group that is more stable than anyone else. The adults peaked up and then have crashed down over the last few years, even worse than 75%. The designated providers have gone down, and they're usually people that are either caring for a child or caring for someone that can't make it to an access point easily, somebody who's really sick. So those have gone down a fair bit as well. The one group that really has not gone down is the minor children patients. Wow. They hit a peak pretty early, and they've stayed pretty much near. They have gone down, but they've stayed pretty much near those peaks. So those were, I would assume, really, really sick children whose parents just weren't as hooked up into the alternative medical environment that's out there and are desperately trying to find what their kids need. And hopefully some of them have found what their kids need within the system. But again, it's a pathetically small number. It is, by my calculation as of January, there are 82 children that are registered in the database. 82.
Oh, wow, that's not very many at all. That kind of blows the concern about over prescription to children out of the water, doesn't it?
Oh, it's yeah, and again, but back to the point that the system is not meeting their needs. I don't want to. I talk to a lot of people in the community, so I have some feelings about it, but I don't want to pretend to understand what it is for each individual. I do know the possession limits are not adequate. The availability of safe, quality, product that they perceive and that is appropriate for use for medical people, particularly those with immune compromised systems and things like that. It's just not there. Now, people have complained about that for a long time. They're worried about pesticide use. They're worried about this, that, the other thing. Well, an awful lot of work has been done, much of it by the Department of Agriculture and the LCB. That does show, and some of it I've done and some other people have done, but I've kept track of all that stuff pretty closely. And it basically converges to the following. If you're a person in Washington shopping in stores today, and you buy some flour off the shelf, you got about a 30% chance that if that was tested for pesticides, it would fail. If you buy concentrate off the shelves and you buy, you got about a 40 to 50% chance it's going to fail. That's the way it is.
Now, when you say tested for pesticides, what kind of pesticides would you say they would be testing for? Or you think they should be testing for?
I think they should be testing for the ones that are listed in their own rules that were supplied to them in part by our Department of Health and Department of Agriculture, but ultimately used the action levels and the specific list of pesticides that were adopted by Oregon in around 2000 and whenever it was. I forget the history of that.
And if anyone who wants to find out, if you go to the state of Oregon's website and you go to the Oregon Health Program, you can actually find, if you dig deep enough, you can find a list of approved pesticides for use with cannabis.
Yes, and you can do the same in Washington. It's out there. I mean, it's not something I look at regularly. I get notifications, and many people do, when the list changes of what's okay and what's not. Yeah. So, but the point is, and this is actually a good point, there are only 4 labs, I think, that are doing the testing, 5 if you count the WSDA hops lab in Yakima. There are 5 labs that are doing testing for pesticides for cannabis in this state. They all test different pesticides. I mean, they all have a lot of similar overlap. There's a handful of pesticides that are used more frequently than others, but they all test different. So one lab tests for 32, one lab tests for 50. The WSDA lab tests for, I think, almost 200 different pesticides of the thousands that exist in the world. And, they're certified, the ones that do it, except the WSDA lab, is not certified, but the others are certified. And they're all capable of testing, presumably, and testing accurately.
So let's pivot a little bit and talk about traceability. And
Sure.
That was a big thing that was put on us by the Cole memo. And we were just at a meeting the other day with the new chairperson, David Postman, and he was really happy that they had this Cole memo and everything. And one of the things in the Cole memo from the federal government said that we had to trace our cannabis. And from what you were telling me, they were pretty good for a while. But then I covered this for Ganjapreneurs on Halloween 2017. The whole thing fell apart. They still are tracing some things, but what have we lost by the LCB not tracing cannabis as closely as they should anymore?
Oh, a great deal. First of all, the ability for the LCB to understand and really be experts of the market they're regulating. And if they were experts in the market they were regulating, and I mean experts in terms of those that are informed of the data it puts out and thereby know the market, they'd be able to give better advice to the legislators and to other agencies that are involved in the regulation of cannabis. As it is, I have seen very little evidence that the LCB has proactively used the hugely wonderful resource that the traceability system is for understanding what's going on in the market. But you're right. On Halloween of 2017, after just over 3 years of having BioTrack supply the data and it being reasonably good and complete, and having a whole industry around that and doing things with it, myself included, they switched vendors, and it's just been a real cluster since then. There is a traceability system out there, and commerce is happening, but they can't accurately or completely tie lab results to product. They can't implement a centralized traceability of anything. You wouldn't be able to do a centralized product recall, for example, and be able to find where everything is from a dated batch. They honestly do not know to this day what type of the extent of commerce that is going on between licensees. This is really good. We've got so much overproduction built into this state. They licensed like four to six times as much canopy as the consultants said that they needed, and then squeeze down the number of access points, stores that are out there. But in that context of having way too much cannabis production capacity in the market, they've also basically shut down the ability to track where that cannabis is going. And then that they've done rules like eliminating the quarantine period, which was one of the very few investigative tools they had, where somebody could say, I'm about to destroy 1,000 pounds. And it had to be kept in a room for a day. Now they can just say, I'm going to destroy 1,000 pounds and destroy. I'm serious. That's the way it is now.
And then they can mail it back east and say they destroyed it. Perfect.
Yeah. That is Washington's market.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
What's sort of shocking about all this, and I know we're laughing, and it is funny in a kind of like what the heck kind of way.
I don't mean to laugh. It's just sometimes when you build a system this poorly, it's almost funny if it wasn't hurting patients. And
they're paying $50,000 a month for this sucker to be hosted by a company that's not even maintaining the software.
Yeah, it's DOD levels of wasting money.
Mm-hmm.
But it's profound because the LCB knows that all this stuff is getting overproduced and diverted. This is not a secret.
They knew it in 2016, and when we pointed it out to them, their response was to turn off the data set that we used to be able to tell that they were having the problem.
I don't know.
Well, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, Washington's industry, the retailers, I'm sure will do fine. The wholesale side of the industry, the vast majority of it is going to get destroyed if they don't change something in the way they regulate between now and that day when interstate commerce is allowed. Because we're one of the only states that does not require, to this day, not only pesticide and heavy metal testing, we don't even bloody well require yeast and mold testing.
Oh, gosh. That's not...
Yeah. Here's something I just discovered, too. Every other plant in the state of Washington in a nursery has to have a tag and a license under a nursery license, except for high THC cannabis. They don't care about those plants going all over the place. All the other plants have to be tested and monitored and everything except for this one. And we talk about this sometimes on the show. It just kind of seems like they're just kind of like, oh, who cares? We'll take the tax money, let the dopers do what we want to. Let the whole thing fall apart, be no good. We'll take the tax money and just see ya. So it's a very interesting system that we have set up here in Washington.
Yeah. The one thing I would say that sort of falls counter to that, but I agree with you overall, is that they really do feel that there's a need for more tax revenue here, and there's pretty good set of data to support that from an overall policy perspective. So when they suddenly are getting 500 to 600 million extra a year, and it's extra out of this industry, which, by the way, could easily double in the next 5 years if they do their jobs correctly. They're not going to sneeze at that. It's getting up to be in the 2 to 3% of overall state revenue range now.
Wow.
And if they could find an effective way to capture revenue from all that interstate commerce that they're not effectively regulating right now, that could really throw off the projection now too, couldn't it?
Well, they do, because all of the profits from that, people that live here in Washington, spend it on things and
fair enough.
6.5% sales tax.
All right. So, Jim, one of the things I wanted to talk to you today on the show about is a recent post that you made. You made 3 of them over on your blog. So tell us the name of your blog, and then the name of the post that you made is in a series called Fidelis Cannabis. Tell us about this little project and what's going on with that.
Sure. I run a blog called Hi Blog, HI blog, but it's the best way to get to it is www.highintelligence.org. And then I'll just take you right to my blog page, which is under my commercial page. And I'm eventually going to have an index, but I'm not a WordPress expert. It's all out there. It's all categorized. The Fidelis Cannabis post that I did recently, the three of them, I finally just got disgusted with the lack of consumer protection oversight by the LCB. And the catalyst for that, Lucas, was the Praxis closure and what the LCB did afterwards. And God bless them. I think they did the right thing closing Praxis or suspending them. Praxis was a lab that was found or accused of inflating cannabinoids in the product they tested.
Yeah, and the LCB came down pretty hard on them.
Yes, but the LCB was very specific. The LCB, in their announcement, said that they identified 1,200 samples where this had been done, right? It's like, whoa. So as you may imagine, I have a public record request in around that, but I haven't seen the results yet. I know some people have, so I kind of know it's there, but I haven't seen it firsthand. Anyway, that happened. They used the words consumer deception. So I went, oh, okay. So now you got a bunch of product out there that's labeled as, it's labeled whatever. It's labeled to be Miller Lite, and it's really Everclear, or it's really Everclear, but it's labeled to be something else, or whatever. People are going to be making bad decisions in titrating their doses if they don't know what the dose is. It's in opposition to the fundamental promise of regulated cannabis, which is that the consumers will know what they are consuming and that it will have passed a minimal safety screen. And when they look at the label and it says 40% alcohol by volume in cannabinoid terms, it really is. It's not 20%, it's not 60%. That shit's dangerous if you mislabel it. So anyway, the LCB identified that there were 1,200 bad lots, but they didn't do a product recall. They never do product recalls. Well, they have subsequently done a product recall, but they did not do a recall in this situation. So I said, fine. So I wrote an article that wasn't part of the Fidelis post, but it was the impetus for it, where I named a bunch of processors, wholesalers.
Your meeting will end in 10-minute window.
Okay, I'll go very quickly. That we're using Praxis heavily. I named them. That caused a real just for consumers that cared. And then subsequently, the Fidelis list, I decided to extend it because I've been looking at the labs for years. And even though the data are imperfect since Leaf took over on Halloween of 2017, they are not completely absent. You can do some stuff with it. So I have a pretty good idea amongst the labs which ones I trust and which ones I don't trust based on looking at their data and numerous other things.
And folks can find that over there at the blog post, the name of those labs.
Yeah, and yes, I do actually kind of name them, but in 2 of the 3 posts I do. But what I do basically is I said, look, this is an opinion piece. I trust these labs. When my friends say whose product should I buy, I tell them. Or who can I trust? I tell them. So I figured I'd just make it up and make it available for people. So I first of all did it with wholesalers. I said, which wholesalers are using the labs I trust? Good. They're the Fidelis wholesalers. Then I rolled up their data to the retailers and said, okay, which retailers are differentially doing business with wholesalers that are using labs I trust? And I named the retailers that were on the top and the bottom of that list in each county. So again, it's for the consumers to have if you care about what you put in the body and the accuracy of the labels, you're better off going to these stores than going to these stores, is my opinion. And then I did a third one where I rolled up the retailers that I knew had chains of multiple stores as chains and said which chains are the best and the worst.
Yeah, so people can find that over at Jim's blog. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do people, if you were going into a store, how do you find out the name of the lab that tests the flower when you go into a store?
You should always ask for a certificate of analysis that corresponds to the product you're considering purchasing. The stores are required to be able to produce that. If not the document, a link on the computer that'll point you to it. so that it tells you what lab did the testing and all of the test results, the individual test results the lot received. In my experience, over 90% of the stores in the state cannot do that in a timely fashion. And my advice to people has always been, if they can't do it, shop elsewhere.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll just look at you funny. And this is one of the things that the LCB said was a good thing, because they changed all the labels. And they said, we don't have to have all this on the label, because you can just look at the certificate, or the people can give you the link.
Wait, you don't get the lab name on the certificate? I can go back. See, in Oregon, it's different. You can look right on the label to see where it was tested, who grew it, and when it was harvested.
No, that would be too transparent for our patients here in Washington, because the thing is, the agency that made the rule that Lucas is talking about that removed the from the label, or that didn't require it, is the same agency that is fully aware that they have a massive quality assurance problem in their industry, and they're too friggin' lazy to even they do hundreds of on-site underage buy attempts. They call them compliance checks per year, sometimes per month. They do like almost 100. When they're in the stores, they could ask for COAs and give a violation if people can't do them. If they started enforcing it, people would do it.
Yeah, they removed a lot of that from the label, and now the labels are pretty much bare bones. We want to put more stuff on there, like terpenes. I am so sick of these names. As a patient, I want to know what the product does to me. Some of the cannabis in the market is decent. And I want to clarify real quick. This has been on my mind lately. I've been really critical of the cannabis system here in Washington, but there are a lot of good players out there. Go check out Jim's blog, and maybe you can find some. And there's a lot of good people in the system out there, too. It's just usually the LCB and the governmental agencies that we are very critical of. And there are some growers out there that aren't all that great. But there are people in Washington that are trying hard. We wish the LCB would help them out a little better and make it easier for the good guys to get up front.
I would argue that it is the majority of the people are trying hard and are good people, and their hearts are in the right place.
Yep.
And the rules have been set up and enforced in such a way that the cards are really stacked against them.
They almost seem to encourage a little bit of bad behavior just to stay competitive, don't they?
They don't actively discourage it.
That's a problem.
All right, so give us the name of your blog one more time, Jim, and any other information you want to give us, and then we will get out of here to our next segment. It's a bust. So tell us your blog, Jim, and anything else.
My blog is HighBlog. It's www.highintelligence.org, HIGH, intelligence, one word, .org. And I include a lot of data and charts in most of my stuff, and some songs and poetry that are cynical and sarcastic. But I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, you can reach me by leaving a comment on my blog, and that kind of gives me an email notification. I know how to get hold of you. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you so much, Jim.
All right, so I want to really thank Jim there for coming on the show. He is a great resource, so check him out over at his blog that he gave there. And now we're going to get into our final segment of the show, and that is our It's a Bust segment. And dig, this is a bust right here. This is another article I wrote. You go over on ganjapreneur.com and check this out. There was a police officer or a cop over in Los Angeles. He's actually a sheriff's deputy. And he decided he was going to rob a cannabis warehouse. And he went in and he used a fake search warrant, got by the guards at the front, and
he had some fake sheriff's deputies wearing real sheriff's deputies uniforms too.
Yep. And they showed up and they proceeded to rob the place of over $600,000 in cash and a half a ton of cannabis.
Yeah, a half ton. He showed up with a sheriff vehicle too and used that in the robbery.
Yeah, and then in the middle of the robbery, the people who had the warehouse were like, what the heck? They called the real police. The police showed up. And then the sheriff deputy convinced the police that he was there legitimately with the sheriff's office, and the police left. And he stole all that weed and he stole all that cash, but he did get busted along with the other defendants. But I was kind of shocked, Dig. He only got sentenced to 7 years in prison.
Yeah, that's 7 years in federal prison. So it wasn't, I don't know if it was the impersonating a law enforcement officer that got him in the most trouble, but it does seem like a relative slap on the wrist for what was a pre-planned large volume robbery of cannabis business.
And his other defendants got up to 4 to 14 years. So that is our It's a Buzz segment for this show, and we are about to get on out of here. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you would like to contact me, you can send an email to me over to info@radiotacoma.org. Just put Cannabis Corner in the subject line, and they will get it to me. And if you want to contact Dig, let everybody know how they can contact you, Dig.
Yeah. You can follow me on Instagram at Uncle Dig, or you can send me an email at uncledig4@gmail.com.
This is Cannabis Corner, hosted by Lucas Barfield. If you would like to get in contact with your host, he is on Twitter at MJIsMedicine. Your musical selection is The Happy Monster by Chubby Jackson and his orchestra, recorded on 78 in 1947. You can find this music and much more at the Great 78 Project, an archive of historical music recordings at great78.archive.org. You are listening to 101.9 KTAH, Radio Tacoma.